This video is brought to you by Brilliant. For the last few years, the EU has been trying to ratify a new treaty, which would essentially create an EU-wide backstop for European banks. As one of the weaker Eurozone economies, and generally pretty keen on deeper economic integration, you might assume that this is the sort of thing that Italy would be in favour of. In reality though, Italy has single-handedly held up the treaty's ratification for the past few years, and last month the Italian Parliament voted it down, with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni describing it as obsolete. This has sparked a furious row in the EU, and reversed some of the progress made between Meloni and the EU recently. So in this video, we're going to have a look at the new treaty, why Italians hate it, and what this means for EU-Italy relations going forward. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, to understand this story, you need to know at least a little bit about the European Stability Mechanism, or ESM. While this might sound technical and economicsy, the basic idea is actually super simple. The ESM is about creating a big EU-wide pot of money to prevent bank runs. For context, banks essentially create money by lending out more money than they actually have on hand. While this is generally a good thing for the economy, and not an issue if the bank's customers are happy to leave their money in the bank, if customers all of a sudden rush to withdraw their cash, then sometimes the bank can run out of cash. This can create a dangerous self-fulfilling prophecy, because once some customers start pulling their money out, other customers are also incentivized to take the money out, because they know that the bank is running out of money and don't want to be left empty-handed. Anyway, many financial crises have bank-run dynamics. The 2008 financial crisis in the US, for example, was sort of caused by a bank run amongst big financial institutions like money market funds that had basically become banks, lending out more money than they had on hand. Now, today, when money can be printed by central banks and isn't tied to gold or any other metal, the easiest solution to a bank run is for the central bank or the government to give the bank a whole load of money, and promise to give it as much money as it needs to pay out. Not only does this mean the banks can pay out the customers who want their money, but it should also restore confidence, and other customers should be less likely to withdraw their money because they're no longer worried about the bank running out of cash. In many ways, this is what the Federal Reserve did after 2008, when it essentially backstopped a whole load of banks and non-bank financial institutions. Similarly, the Eurozone crisis was also partly caused by bank runs, which then created a vicious cycle between banks and their governments. As banks started to fail, governments had to borrow lots of money to bail them out, which only strained their national budgets and, thanks to austerity, slowed down their economies, which then put more strain on the financial sector. Anyway, one of the reasons the Eurozone crisis was so difficult to stop, and why America recovered faster than Europe after 2008, was because EU member states couldn't decide on who should do the bailing out. In 2010, Europe finally agreed a joint fund to act as a European backstop, called the European Financial Stability Facility. It was used by Greece, Spain, Ireland and Portugal, who could borrow money from the fund if they agreed to certain structural reforms, i.e. austerity. The EFSF was replaced by the European Stability Mechanism, or ESM, in 2012, and in June 2019, the EU decided it should be expanded. The precise details of this reform are a bit complicated, but it's basically about expanding the ESM so that it can be more easily used to bail out banks, not just member states. Now, at first glance, you might assume that Italy would be in favour of this sort of thing. After all, as one of the weaker economies in the Eurozone, Italy has usually been in favour of joint EU funds, because they essentially force stronger European economies, like Germany, to share the burden in the event of a crisis. However, that's not quite how things have panned out. The ESM has become a massive political issue in Italy, and last December, Italy single-handedly blocked the new treaty after the Italian Parliament voted it down, with Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia voting against it. So why is this? Well, some Italian politicians have complained about the specifics of the new ESM, including the use of certain sovereign debt contract clauses, and the fact that it ignores that most of Italy's debt is held by residents, which makes restructuring difficult. Others, including Lega leader Matteo Salvini, have warned that the new ESM could entail Italian pensioners paying for the rescue of foreign banks, a stark reversal from the Eurozone crisis, when German politicians were worrying about bailing out the Italian banks. There's even been some speculation that the Italians are trying to use their ESM veto to force the EU into concessions on the Stability and Growth Pact reforms. For context, the Stability and Growth Pact sets limits for member states' debt and deficits, but it was suspended during the pandemic, and the EU is currently trying to transform it from a uniform set of fiscal adjustment requirements into a bunch of more bespoke plans unique to each member state. But the main reason seems to be that the ESM is just super politically toxic in Italy, and most of the Italian public and political class associates it with the brutal austerity programmes forced upon countries like Greece in the early 2010s, even though most economists think things would have been even worse for Greece without the EFSF. While Italy never actually used the EFSF, Italy has always been wary of the EU's attempts to impose fiscal discipline, especially after its harsh treatment by the ECB during the 2010s. The ESM specifically really became a political issue in late 2019, when Salvini, whose Lega party had just been kicked out of government, accused the new government of treason in agreeing to the reforms, despite the fact that Salvini himself had actually signed off on the reforms only a few months earlier, when he was in government. It's been a political issue ever since, used by successive Italian politicians, including Meloni, to burnish their anti-establishment and anti-EU credentials. So what happens next? Well, it's hard to see the ESM being agreed anytime soon, given its political toxicity and the fact that it was voted down by such a wide margin. Perhaps the more interesting question is how this affects Meloni's relations with the rest of the EU. Despite a history of Euroscepticism, since coming to power, Meloni has generally been on the same page as the EU on stuff like Ukraine and migration, risks undermining the goodwill Meloni has garnered with other EU leaders so far, and we might expect a more antagonistic relationship going forward. As we step into 2024, many of us are contemplating our New Year's resolutions, always looking to improve ourselves and learn more about the world around us. And while our content is always a good starting point, a lot of stuff we talk about can seem pretty complicated, especially when we dive into analytics and detailed data. But luckily there's a fun and easy way to learn more, which also doesn't cost thousands of dollars or take years and years of schooling. That's because Brilliant is the best way to learn maths, data science and computer science interactively. And the good thing is, it doesn't take long to learn either. These complex topics are broken down into small but accessible chunks, designed around your busy schedule. Even just a few minutes a day can help you with accumulating new knowledge over time in a fun and engaging way. As time goes on, you'll also get used to that empowering feeling of learning too, because Brilliant isn't just about memorization and lectures. Brilliant teaches you by doing, using active learning techniques to teach you the principles behind otherwise quite complex subjects, and ensuring you actually understand what's going on. So whether you want to brush up on your basic math skills, improve your employment prospects, or just have another New Year's resolution for 2024, you can check out everything Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days by going to brilliant.org/TLDR. Plus, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support.